It is the start of a new NBA season, so I wanted to make sure to record a video for you guys to let you know how to use the contest generator and the Sims here at Stokastic. So if you haven't played DFS since last NBA season and you forgot how to use our tools, this should help you. Or maybe you are brand new to our tools and you have no clue what it is you're looking at. This also should help you in that kind of scenario. If you have any additional questions, let me know down below in the YouTube comments. Just drop a question. I'll be sure to circle back and answer any of those. And then also, if you want to sign up for a package at Stokastic to get access to these tools, there's also a link to sign up below. And then also, any of the packages we have here at Stokastic, it comes with access to our Discord channel. So you could also hop into Discord after you sign up and ask any additional questions that you may have in there. So also, do me a favor while you're watching this, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. What we're looking at here is the contest generator and where you are going to build out all of the lineups that ultimately end up getting simmed is on this page. So I already built out a pool here just so you guys don't have to sit here and watch the screen build the lineups. It usually only takes like 30 to 60 seconds, but I want to save you guys that 30 to 60 seconds or so. But I'll show you the different selections that you make when you build out your pool to make sure that it is optimized for the contest that you're playing in. It starts with selecting the correct site. So we support DraftKings, FanDuel, Yahoo, and Owner's Box here. Also, the contest type. There's Classic and Showdown. So if you're playing in the single game slates, the showdowns, all of those are supported here in the Sims. So all of the ones that you see for the late night single games, or sometimes there's a 7 p.m. Eastern time single game, whatever's posted on the sites, we support it here in the Sims. And that also goes for the slate here. So for the first slate of the season, it is only a 2-game main slate. If you see and you selected the showdown, then you would have the drop down for the different showdown selections. But for main slates, you're going to see things like late night slate, turbo slate, and those are all selectable within here when you build out your contest pool. Pool size. So we do have a couple of different packages here at Stokastic. We have the max package that allows you to build up to 5,000 lineups. And then we also have the core package that allows you to build up to 2,000 lineups. So what you want to do with your pool size selection is make it most closely related to the contest that you're playing in. So maybe you're just playing in a single entry that only has 1,000 entries or something like that. You would select 1,000. If you're playing in the marquee flagship contests that have 10, 20, 30,000 entries, whatever it may be, you want to select 5,000 if you're on the max package, or 2,000 if you are on the core package. In that kind of scenario, you always want the pool size to be as close to the contest you're playing in as possible. Then we also have here the contest archetype setting. So what this is going to do is it is going to optimize the pool made for the contest buy-in that you're playing in. So the reason for this is, if you've ever played DFS in different stakes, you may notice that as the buy-in changes, so does the ownership. In general, the higher stakes contests tend to be a little bit sharper. The lower stakes contests tend to be a little bit less sharp. So the best overall projected players on a given slate, they're more likely to be higher owned in the high stakes contest, and they're more likely to be lower owned in the low stakes contest. And then we've got marquee in the middle. That's what you're going to primarily be using. Think about things like the $5 150 max contest on DraftKings, the $9 150 max contest on FanDuel. Any of those massive contests are generally going to be the marquee settings. I think of low stakes as things below $2, and I think of high stakes as $100 or more. So after you have all of these selections made to fit the contest that you're doing a simulation for, you press generate lineups, which I already did here to build out all these lineups. And then what you're going to see on the page is ownership, pool exposures, and then difference. So ownership, this is simply what we are projecting for ownership in our classic ownership projections. Pool exposure, this is what we got for the exposure of the players in the lineups. And this should fairly closely mirror the ownership. It's not going to be the exact same number every single time, but it should be within a couple percentage points or so. And you'll see that here in the difference column. That's just the difference between the pool exposure and the ownership. So one other thing I want to point out to you guys before we move on to the next screen, there's something here for boost ownership. The only scenario that you want to use this is if you think we are wrong on a player's ownership. If you think, for instance, Luka is going to be higher owned than the 50% we haven't projected for, you could boost his ownership, regenerate lineups, and then that will rebuild a pool of lineups that has more lineups with Luka in it, and it would boost what his, in effect, projected ownership is. You could do the inverse as well if you think he's going to be lower owned than we have projected. But what you do not want to do is, if you want more or less of a player, don't make that change on this page. What you want to be doing here is building out a pool of lineups that resembles what the field is going to be doing. And then after you're done, you'd press simulate lineup. So for the boost ownership, you only do that if we disagree with an ownership projection that we have on the site. When you actually want to change your individual exposures to players, I'll show you how to do that in a second. You do that on a different page. Now, after you have your lineups built out in the contest generator, you're going to come over to our projection page, and there's more customizations that could be made here, but we're going to start at the top with percentage payout to first. So the way this is figured out is whatever the percentage payout to first is in the contest you're playing in, that's what you want to select here. So let's say you're in a contest that this is like a pretty standard payout for DraftKings, a $400,000 prize pool with 100,000 to first, 100,000, that is 25% of 400,000. So you would select the 25% to first payout, and we have a bunch of different payout structures here for the different percentages to first. If there is not a number that is the exact payout on this page that what's offered on DraftKings, FanDuel, Owners Box, Yahoo, wherever you're playing, select a percentage to first that is closest to the actual contest. So if it's 24% the contest payout to first and whatever you're playing in, you'd select 25% to first in that kind of scenario. Now, also down here, you are going to see the Stokastic projections already loaded into this page. So you see here our minutes, fantasy points per minute, projected fantasy points, the points per dollar value, the ownership of the players. Then we've also got standard deviation here as well as variance. So if you want to just build out and sim your lineups with the Stokastic projections, totally cool. You don't have to make any changes, and you just press run contest simulation. But maybe you have your own custom projections. You could upload them. Simply go to here where it says upload CSV, and then you would select a CSV from your already saved files with these columns: player name, projection, and ownership. And then when you upload that CSV, all these columns are going to be changed to match where your own personal projections are. But if you just want to make some quick projection changes on this page, you could absolutely do that as well. If you just want to project Luka for more fantasy points than we have, cool. Just type in whatever number you want. If you want to change it and roll it back, you just press this arrow and it'll go back. Also, if you wanted to just change any player's projection by 1 fantasy point, you can just press the plus and minus arrows, and that will also do that for you as well. As far as standard deviation and variance, one thing that I find helpful, that once again, you don't have to do any of this, but one thing that I like to do for something like variance on the late swap tool is, once a player's fantasy point total is already locked in, let's say the 7 p.m. games have already finished and you're doing some late swaps for the 10 p.m. games, you could actually enter the exact amount of fantasy points a player has already scored. You could change their variance to 0. And then on every single simulation run, it is going to know the exact amount of fantasy points that player scored. But in here, you could change the standard deviation variance of players. And what that'll do is it'll change how much changes there are in a player's output in each simulation run. So if you want to up the amount of variance, you could press the plus arrow, and this will make it so there's just a wider range of outcomes in their simulations. Then you can do the inverse as well by downgrading the amount of variance, and that will make it so that there's less fluctuation in the player's fantasy score totals in each simulation run. So after you have all this finished, you got the percentage to first selected, you've got all of your projection changes made. If you want to make any, once again, you absolutely do not have to. The vast majority of people just play with the standard Stokastic projections, don't make any changes. After you're done with that, you would simply press run contest simulation. So what is happening here is the slate is being simulated tens of thousands of times. So everything that happens in a game, it is being simulated here using all of the lineups that we built out in the contest generator. So all of these games individually are being simulated out, and that is also going to take into account all of the players' different fantasy point totals in each individual game they play in tens of thousands of times to give us a lot of different outcomes to determine how strong the lineups are that were built in the contest generator. And then also what happens over the course of all those games being played tens of thousands of times is the lineups are playing against themselves tens of thousands of times in the payout structure that we selected here. So this is then going to tell us over the course of all the simulations we ran, how much money did each of these lineups make in that contest structure. And then you'll see here when the simulation ends, all of the lineups are sorted by simulated ROI. So this is what the ROI was of those lineups in all of those tens of thousands of simulations when they all played against each other. This is what the simulated ROI was of these lineups. You see the top lineup here, it had a 190.5% simulated ROI. And that is how you should be sorting all of these lineups and selecting them. There's some other data here as well about the lineups, like projected fantasy points, the amount of ownership they have in total, the amount of times, or the percentage of times, I should say, they actually won a GPP, the percentage of time that it finished top 10 in a GPP, the percentage of times that it at least min cash, and then dupes, which since this is a 2-game slate, the dupes actually matter more than they would on a normal NBA slate. For most main slates, dupes aren't all that much of a concern, but it is something that's pretty interesting to look at for a 2-game slate, where you can see there are lineups that are expected to be duped multiple times, and that also is going to impact the simulated ROI, because if a lineup comes in first without any dupes, it returns more money than a lineup that's duped multiple times. So that is something else that you could look at, and also something that really matters for showdown contests. You could also see here the actual lineup, all the players that are in it, and then the salary used in those lineups. So after you have all of these lineups built, you could also quick favorite lineups. You could either do any of these default favorite 20, favorite 50, favorite 100. You could favorite a custom amount if you wanted to favorite, say, like you're playing 70 lineups on a slate. You could just enter 70 here. For the purpose of this, I'm just going to select 150. One other thing as well, if you want to mix up the players that are in your lineups a little bit, you could also set a number of uniques. So this will make it for, let's say you set 2 uniques. That would mean for each lineup selected, there has to be at least 2 different players compared to a previous lineup. So that's another selection you can make here to make your lineups a little bit more diverse. Definitely comes in handy for things like showdown, or for 2 or 3 game slates where there's a little bit less options. You could select an amount of uniques. So for this, I'll select the 150 lineups, and then we'll go and look at the exposures tab. We've also got here everything sorted by position. So you can either look at all players, or you can look at the individual positions to see what you're getting to at each position as far as exposure goes. And you'll see in all these different columns the salary of the player. This was the ROI of this player across all of the lineups that they were in, their projected fantasy points, what their pool ownership is. So this is what their projected ownership is, and then exposure. This is the amount of lineups that we have with that player, and then the leverage, that is the difference between the exposure and the pool ownership. So for example here, we have Isaiah Hartenstein projected for 45.6% ownership. We have him in 80% of lineups. So the leverage is 34.4%, because that is the difference between how much exposure we have to him and how much exposure the field is getting. You could sort this as well, so you could see which players you're most overweight to and which players you are most underweight to. So you could use that to see who it is you're rooting for, who you're fading, all things along those lines. Now, if you want to change the amount of exposure you have to players, I mentioned earlier, you do not want to do that on the contest generator page. Here's where you want to do it, and here's how you go about doing it. So go to the ROI boost, and let's say you don't want 80% of Isaiah Hartenstein. Here's what you could do. If you want less than 80%, you could do something like a negative 10% ROI boost. And for this, just play around with it, because you maybe don't have an exact amount of exposure you want to get to a player. And if that's the case, just kind of play around with this and see what it is you're comfortable with. Or maybe you have an exact amount, and I'll show you a way that you could also change a player's exposure to the exact amount you want. But if you want to have less exposure to Isaiah Hartenstein, you could do a negative 20% ROI boost, press boost ROI, then go back to the lineups page, unfavorite your lineups, refavorite your top 150, and then you could go back here and you would see that Hartenstein has gone from 80 to 70% of lineups. And if you ever want to undo any of these boosts, you just delete it, press boost ROI again, and then you will see that that has gotten deleted and it's gone back to 0%. And then same deal, you'd go back to the lineups page, unselect your favorite lineups, reselect your top 150, and we'll be back at 80% of Isaiah Hartenstein. But maybe you have an exact number in mind of a cap you want for Hartenstein. Here's what you could do. Go to exposure caps. Let's say you only want 50% of Hartenstein. Just press 50%. then set exposures and adjust favorites. You also do a global max exposure. Maybe you don't want any more than 50% of any individual player. You could also do that. But for Hartenstein here, we'll set him to 50%, set exposures and adjust favorites. And now we are going to have exactly 50% of Isaiah Hartenstein. Here's also a way that you could set a minimum amount of exposure to a player. And I'll go back and I'll delete that exposure cap on Hartenstein just so we get him back to the full exposure that he had before. So here's something else you could do. Let's say I'll scroll down. All right. So Brandon Pajemski, we only have 7% of Pajemski. Maybe you want to have exactly 25% of him. Here's what you could do. Go to your ROI boosts. Go to Pajemski. This is something I play around with a lot on smaller slates, especially for things like Showdown for NFL. I'll just boost him really aggressively for ROI. I'll put him on 100% ROI, but this could give you more than your desired exposure to Pajemski unless you do this. If you aggressively boost his ROI, but then you set his max exposure to 20% and set exposure and adjust favorites, you will now have exactly 20% of Brandon Pajemski. So scroll down, you'll see 20% of Pajemski. So if you want to know how to set an exact minimum exposure to a player, that's a way you could do that as well. And then once you have all of your lineups and your exposures figured out exactly how you want it, what you would do here is you would then go over to the entry manager. You could upload your lineups, the CSV from DraftKings, FanDuel, wherever you're playing, and then you just select your top lineups. We do have a video on the site for how to use the entry manager. So if you want to know specifically just how to use that portion of it, it is a super easy way to upload your lineups to DraftKings, FanDuel, wherever you're playing. There's a video for that lineup function on the site as well. Other than that, though, the tools, they're pretty complicated on the back end, but they're pretty easy to use on the front end. There's not really too much else that you guys need to know. And honestly, if you have a process right now where you're just hand building lineups, making no adjustments to the sims, and just simply running the contest generator and the sims, it's probably going to give you much better results than you're already getting right now. So the adjustments that you can make here, it's fully in your control to make any adjustments you want, but it is absolutely not necessary at all. Other than that, guys, thank you very much for watching. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you have any questions at all, let me know down below in the YouTube comment section. Other than that, let's have a great season and good luck this year.